This is Gene Lance on the Workers Beat. I've got Ryan, and I can't say it. Is it Ahmadian?
Ahmadian.
On. Ahmadian. Okay.
Yeah.
Ryan Ahmadian. I picked you because you're young and because I'm not. And I want to know what's going on with all the young people. You been out protesting?
Yeah, I have been a handful of times. I would say there's a few people out there that have been to more demonstrations than I have, but the general atmosphere is about the same throughout these demonstrations in Dallas. One thing is that they're consistent. You can definitely tell that the people in Dallas are progressive, and they're moving towards a more progressive stance at each one of these rallies and protests and demonstrations you go to. It's been a
What do you
very
mean they're moving? What do you mean they're moving toward a more progressive stance? I mean, all of them are just saying that they protest the death of George Floyd, right? What else are they saying?
Not in particular. That's definitely what the thing that sparked it, but that's not an individual incident that's causing all these protests and rallies. I mean, if we look throughout history, even recent history, as close as 2014 and 2015, when there was protests and riots in Baltimore and Ferguson, and these were the same emotions and the same feelings that were throughout the streets that you see right now. But now we've learned from the mistakes that we made, whether it's trusting certain organizations and not. There's a certain amount of things that have to go into turning a moment into a movement and turning it into a successful movement to where we can actually accomplish material goals and demands that will bring changes to the problems that we're protesting against, which is police brutality and the issue of policing in general and how that is harming black and brown communities throughout the United States.
So it's not just a protest. You're saying that it's actually evolving, and people are learning stuff. So, like, what have they learned? What have they learned? What are they saying now?
So, one of the main demands that we've seen gone viral, as you should say, or gone popular, is defunding the police, which is a very good demand in the short term and in the long term, if you think about it. But it's a demand that we need to understand fully as to why we're defunding the police. We're not just defunding the police for the sake of defunding it. It's because we need to understand relatively how much funds are going into the police department annually that could be going into other sectors of society, such as public health, education, housing, food, you name it. So these are things that are starting to be more consistent throughout these protests, which are things that you haven't heard throughout the history in America. These are very socialist demands, as you could say, because they're arguing for, housing for everybody, health care for everyone, ultimately when you're defunding the police. Because when you defund the police, that money has to go somewhere, and it's going out of the pockets of the militarized police state here in America and going into things that will bring positive benefit changes throughout our communities.
Your audio is kind of changing a little bit as you speak,
okay.
And I think the reason is moving in your chair.
Sorry.
Either that or it's just the service. It could be either one. I like it.
I didn't know that affects.
When you sit up forward like you are now.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
When you say defund the police, do you mean take away all of their money? Just flat quit paying for them?
Yeah.
Or is it just partial?
Ultimately, yes, because ultimately the goal is to abolish the police, because the police Yes.
Okay.
And I say that because the police are they're the armed protectors of the ruling class. So what they're designed to do is to protect private property and to protect the interests of the ruling class, also known as the capitalist class, or the top 1%. The people who hoard all the wealth, but also hoard all the capital, the private property, they're the ones who own all these multi-million-dollar corporations and the ones who are ultimately impacting how our government operates and how our government works, because they're benefiting from it. They're the ones that are funding the lobbies, funding the politicians who create laws that benefit corporations who are deciding how they profit off of the exploitation of the working class. and those laws are enforced by the law enforcement, which is the police.
So you basically think getting rid of capitalism is a good idea, I take it. Is that what a lot of protesters think?
A good amount of them are. I can't speak for everybody, obviously, and I'm not out there doing surveys or polls, but I mean, you can hear throughout the rallies what the people who are up there organizing it, the organizations who are organizing these rallies, what are their party stances, what are their lines, and you can see a lot of socialist organizations, a lot of black radical organizations that have been doing the community organizing, doing the work besides just protesting in the communities for the last 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and even beyond that, because there's a lot of organizations that have history throughout the United States, socialist and communist parties or organizations that have history here who are suddenly starting to re-spark in the recently with everything that's going on, because they see a crowd of people who are becoming politically engaged. They're starting to see a lot of the contradictions present in our society, not just through the last 2 weeks, because it's only been 2 weeks since all of this has been going on. I think Dallas has been protesting every day for about 17 days straight now, something like that. There's been protests every day, that's historical. I don't think there's been anything like that, not only in Dallas, but throughout the United States. I don't think there's been consistent mobilization for one ultimate cause. They may not all agree on the same ultimate goal or the same goal, but the issue at hand, the shorthand, is defunding the police, because we understand how the police they're the escalators, they're the aggravators, they're the reason why crime rates are so high. When police rates are high in the community, crime rates are high, and that's just a statistic that makes sense, because the more police that are present, the more they're going to be enforcing the law, whether it's just or not.
Yeah, but you're saying, I guess, if you're talking about defunding the police, or rather abolishing the police, as you said, then capitalism couldn't go on, could it, or could it? Could capitalism go on without the police?
Well, I think eventually it wouldn't go on, because like we said, the police are there to protect. So they're the defenders. They're the soldiers of the capitalist class. They're there to defend them. And when you start slowly taking away their power, you can't just go from $500 million to $0 in one night. Although that may be ideal, they're not going to do it like that unless you do it through forceful means. If you try to go through the democratic process of defunding the police, which is through City Hall, through City Council, passing legislation that's lowering their budget and maintaining that, because we need to make sure that we're engaging in this, not just right now, not in the moment, but in the future, when next year they pass their budget and they say what their budget is for the police. We need to make sure that it goes even lower than what it was the last time, and even lower and lower, and we got to make sure that those funds are going into the right places. And then through that, I do believe that ultimately people will strive towards understanding that workers are the people that benefit from this at the end of the day, the masses of the workers that are in various communities, not just in poor communities, but middle-class communities, black communities, brown communities. Workers are everywhere, and they'll benefit from the societal programs that gain funding from defunding the police.
And I think Minneapolis, didn't the city council there vote to actually defund the police completely? Or rather, for a period of time, I guess it was.
Right.
And in Dallas, where I live, they had, I think it was $6 million that was getting ready to go to the police, and they postponed it. I don't know if they're going to get it to them.
It's important we pay attention to what our local government is doing.
A lot depends on just what the mood of the population is, because a few years ago in Dallas, a person who, in my opinion, was not very well advised, took a gun and shot 5 policemen. And right after that, millions and millions of dollars began to flow into the police department. So that I heard one of the women from, she's a leader of a group called Mothers Against Police Brutality, and I heard her say that 60% of the city budget goes to the police. I found that hard to believe, but I heard the woman say it, so I know that at least some people believe it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
For here in Dallas, or just?
Yeah.
I mean, the funds are. It's very disproportional. You know, a majority of it is going to the police, and they call it what is it? Public defense. You know, is what they call it. But ultimately, we realize that the police are not defending anybody, but they're actually putting people's lives in danger and in harm's way. And you know, people are like, well, if we get rid of the police, then who's gonna stop my house from being robbed, or who's gonna come protect me when someone's gonna try to do this, and that? And we have to ask ourselves, are the police that, you know, we're already giving all these funds to, are they actually achieving that right now with all the technology that they have and the, you know, extreme amount of resources that they have? Are they actually preventing your house from being robbed or preventing people from being murdered? And the reality of it, they're not. They're really just arresting people for petty crimes, you know, small drug charges, small theft charges. A lot of these crimes and laws that are created kind of as, how should I say, these are byproducts of capitalism and the issues that arise from a capitalist society, such as poverty and hunger and the need for material gains. So people who have been oppressed and marginalized throughout history and don't have the same access to resources that most others have that haven't been marginalized, those people have to look to other ways to gain those resources, and those things are deemed criminal by our capitalist society. So that gives the police justification to arrest them. And then that takes us into the conversation of the prison industrial complex. That's a whole other story and ball game with how the capitalist government is benefiting from that free labor and that slavery in prisons throughout the United States.
Well, you said earlier that young people who are doing these protests are evolving,
right? Changing.
You said, I think you also said that they're joining communist and socialist organizations. Is that right?
As far as joining goes, as far as membership goes, I can't really speak on that. But I think what I was trying to say was that you'll notice who's really behind organizing all these movements, the main organizations, and at the end of the day, even though if they may not identify as socialist or communist, their goals are socialistic and communistic in their demands, as far as they may be short-term, you know. And one organization that I can sort of kind of use as an example is the Alliance Against Racial and Political Repression, and then they have a Dallas chapter here as well, and they've organized a few protests that are very well organized, and they had immediate demands such as not only defunding the police but abolishing the police, because they understand how the police serve the interests of the ruling class, and the history of the police, how racist it is, because they derive from slave patrols, and then they had to enforce Jim Crow laws, and the list goes on of how there has been racial policies and racial undertones to the policies throughout history, such as the war on drugs, and the list. I can talk about it for hours.
The National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression is not a new organization. They actually go back to my day. Do you know much about them?
And like I'm saying, I actually don't. That's the thing.
They're new in Dallas, right?
They do have a fairly new chapter in Dallas. I'm not sure how long they've been organizing. And that's one thing that's kind of interesting to me that I'll kind of use my own little personal, I don't like to talk a lot about my personal experience, but I'm fairly, politically, I'm fairly new. I'm young. I'm only 22 years old. So I obviously wasn't born knowing everything that I know, and I've had to learn these things over time and go through my own political struggle of understanding these things. And I've been trying to organize here in Dallas and get in touch with local groups. And a lot of these groups I've never heard of, or I've never seen them actually organizing here in Dallas. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing about all these new to me organizations that have been here for at least a few years, if not decades. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of interesting, but it's good, you know. It's a little unfortunate that I haven't heard of them until just recently, but it's good that at least I'm hearing about them and that they're presenting themselves and organizing these. They're mobilizing a very young crowd that wants to engage with something, with someone. Someone has to be the vanguard. Someone has to lead the people to at least the right direction of what they need to understand politically, because ultimately we all need to get politically educated because this is a political issue.
You said that this started with the police brutality issue, or that that's what sparked it, but that people are evolving. Because it seems to me that worldwide, people are beginning to focus a great deal on history, on trying to come to grips with understanding the history that they have been taught and the history in perspective of oppression that they're looking at now. And they're taking down statues right and left. Even in Dallas, they're finally going to get rid of that 65-foot monstrosity that's right by the city hall. I saw in the paper yesterday that they think it'll be gone in 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah, they have to make sure they get that somewhere safe and in storage before people get their hands on it.
So was that part of this evolution that you're talking about?
Absolutely, yeah. The people have been actually fighting to get these racist monuments and statues and street names, particularly here in Dallas. And, you know, they went out into city council, into city hall, and they actually spoke. And there's the side that wants the statues down, and then there's the even bigger side that wants the statues up. You know, they're the majority that are there in city council who are pro-Confederacy. You know, they're there with their Confederate flag patches and their camo. They're there supporting their heritage, as they call it, their history, because they believe those statues represent the history of the South, and the people should be able to have the resources to learn the history. But anybody with common sense can understand that history should be taught in a classroom and not on a statue. Statues are meant to memorialize and to perhaps glorify, right? And they'd rather use the funding to go towards the statues than to go into the classrooms. And we look at how the Texas public education system is set up and the way they design their history textbooks to minimalize the racist past of Texas, to say.
And another thing I've noticed is that you were talking about Ferguson a while ago, and there's a movie about Ferguson which I watched. They were nearly all African Americans. But when I see the demonstrations in downtown Dallas, it's not even the majority African Americans. It's literally everybody, every shade of skin color that there is. Is that part of this evolution?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because although this is a racial issue, absolutely it is, and race is one of the worst symptoms. Racial injustice is one of the worst symptoms of racist capitalism, because it stems from colonialism, and the practices of both colonial and capitalist systems and nations throughout history have been brutal in the sense of how they torture and dehumanize black and brown people. And I think it's important to understand that it's not just a racial issue, though. This is ultimately an international working class people issue, because in the way that everyone is becoming unified, people have been agitated prior to these recent killings, because the killings have never stopped. You know, they have been continuing through the creation of the United States, and they've continued, and although we've stopped paying attention to them, or they stopped, you know, showing it in the media, so we stopped paying attention to it, it's still going on. And the only way to end it is to end the system that creates those kind of injustices, which is capitalism.
And when you first started with these protests, were those already your opinions, or are you evolving as well as everybody else?
I am evolving as well as everybody else because, like I said, I'm being introduced to new people, new ideas, new perspectives constantly, and all these different organizations have something positive to bring to the table, and that's why I think it's so important for the people within the protest who are, they may just be, this may be their first time even hearing about any of these ideas, as many of us were at one point, we all heard something that sound good. Hey, free healthcare, free education, free housing for everybody. Like, that sounds like something that's very achievable and attainable, and it should be a possibility for everybody. And when you kind of link the two about how capitalism prevents people from obtaining those things and how you could work towards a socialist society that could provide the basic necessities and resources for the working class people and everybody in general to where that they can benefit from it in the end.
I think most of these things started in the big cities, but today I want to talk a minute about older people just because you might want to know what we're doing. One of my contemporaries said today that he has lived in Rowlett, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, for 23 years, and he's never seen a political action until yesterday. And that Rowlett, Texas, had marchers. They're marching in Keller, Texas. They're marching in, I think they call it Portland, which is a suburb right outside of Corpus Christi. Everywhere, and not just everywhere in the United States, not just small towns and big towns, but all over the world. And some places, like France, for example, are known as, to Americans, they're known as not very racist places. And yet they're marching and taking down statues and evolving, as you said, in other places.
Right.
So you mentioned internationalism. This is truly an international movement, would you say?
Absolutely, it is.
And then what does that mean for American foreign policy? If you don't mind commenting, right at this moment, even though there's a pandemic and worldwide cooperation is absolutely the only possible way to deal with this pandemic, and the United States is continuing to cut off any kind of aid to Cuba, any kind of aid to Venezuela, any kind of aid to Iran. In fact, they're making it worse. And the head of the Defense Department says openly that China is our main military target, and they just passed several $1 billion, particularly aimed at more military buildup against China. So how does that affect, or how is that perceived by you young people that are out marching? Or do they even pay any attention to it?
Well, for the people that are paying attention to it, I think the right answer is that it's very similar for the very similar reasons that we want to defund the police, we should want to defund the military, because their goal and their purpose is the very same reason as how the police protect and serve the interests of the capitalist class. The military is also not only protecting and serving the interests of the capitalist class, but they are further enhancing their interests, and that is one of the main ways that the U.S. gains all of this money that goes into the police, that goes into militarizing this state by exploiting the resources, exploiting the labor forces, exploiting the materials of countries in the global south such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Venezuela, the DPRK, you name it. Through all these sanctions, through the means of sanctions, they're depriving these countries of their own self-determination and their own ability of achieving these kinds of benefits and working towards whatever it is that they want to work towards, whether it's socialism, communism, or just liberating the working class, or they're liberating their people in general, which might be against the interest of the United States capitalist class. Therefore, they need to enforce the military and enforce their strict foreign policy. You know, they say that sanctions are more peaceful, a peaceful way of war than actual violence as far as dropping bombs and deploying the military, but it's affecting the poor people and working class people of those countries the same way that dropping bombs and releasing military does.
Yeah, but is this just your opinion, or is this what protesters are evolving toward or in?
They are evolving toward, like I'm saying, people are understanding how this is becoming a... Yes, the young protesters, through the means of these organizations. You know, it's the people who are organizing with these groups that are up there speaking. You know, they're providing their energy and their resources. There's a lot of young black women up there that I've noticed, you know, speaking a lot at these protests and rallies, and they're hurt. You know, they're hurting right now. There's literally young black women who are dying out there because of men who are, you know, they're harming them because of there's a lot of misogyny going on within these organizing groups, I should say, to get very serious right now. A young 19-year-old woman by the name of Toyin, she was an organizer, and she was raped and killed very recently. And it's important for us within these organizations to keep an eye out on our fellow comrades and our fellow people, and we need to look out to these organizations who are leading us. We need to hold them accountable, and not only do we need to work with them, but we need to struggle with them to enhance this movement. Like I said, everyone is evolving in a personal sense and in a unified, communal, you know, global, I should say global, because the whole world is evolving right now. Through the means of COVID, the things that have gone on with that as far as unemployment and the economic downfall that has happened and it's yet to come, people are becoming more aware of not only the economic downsides to capitalism, but the political, racial, military downsides to it. And people are just, like I said, they're forming new opinions, and they're becoming more politically educated and involved. And it's on us, like me personally. Like you said, does everybody think like that? No, I can't say. I can honestly say a small percentage of the people might fully think like that. But it's on the people that think like that to help those that don't come to that conclusion, ultimately.
So you think they're all going in that direction? Let me because we're running pretty long here, I want to get to two questions, and I'll just give them to you one at a time. But my two questions, which I pretty much ask everybody. First of all, what do you want organized labor to do? And the other question will be, what do you want everybody to do? Because you're really into this. You want it to succeed. Mm-hmm. So have you ever thought about what you would like to see organized labor do?
I would like to see organized labor ultimately regain control of the means of production. You know, I mean, there's ways of doing it within this capitalist system, and then there's ways of kind of creating your own whole system of being able to do that in a national sense. You know, you can do it with organized labor.
So you want organized labor to get a lot stronger than it is now, right?
Right. It needs to.
Well, let's go on to the other question then. Supposing for a moment that millions of people were going to watch this or listen to this, what would you tell them? What do you want them to do?
You know, learn and study history. The history that, you know, us Americans have been taught in school is not only is it wrong, but it's the absolute opposite of what we need to be learning, which is the true history of the working class people and oppressed people. And through that, you're going to become politically educated, and you're going to understand how the people before us, our ancestors who struggled towards working to our same goal, the things that worked for them, what didn't work for them, and we can apply those same things towards achieving our goals and our liberation.
So try to study history and try to understand.
And organize. Get organized. Join a local organization and see what you can do. There's a million ways of contributing. You know, you can You can tutor, you can help, you can go out into communities whose public education systems don't get any funding at all compared to the ones that get some, and you can help them with their homework. You can provide food, you can provide water. You know, there's a lot of communities here in Dallas particularly that are, you know, not getting sufficient water or clean water, and there's a million things you can do. If you want to get in contact with me on Facebook, my name is Ryan Ahmadian, Ahmadian, if I need to spell it. And we can talk. If you're here in the area, we can see how you can contribute to the movement. But ultimately, just get educated and study.
So look for Ryan Ahmadian on Facebook, and that's a good thing for people to do. All right.
Please.
This is Dean Lance on the Workers' Beat, signing off for now.